The Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Speaker, I want to concentrate my remarks this afternoon on the tax working group and some of the changes that are recommended and some of the actions that are going to flow from those changes. And Mr Speaker, I want to begin by saying that if one looks at that report very closely and addresses the distortions that it outlines in our tax system currently, one's drawn to the inevitable conclusion that one of the most distortionary acts in New Zealand tax policy over the last decade was the move to increase the top tax rate in 1999. And that of itself has given rise to a number of problems that we are now having to confront. What the report shows very clearly is that there has been a huge increase in the number and level of trusts formed since 1999, with significant spikes around the points where the marginal tax rates cut in. People have been forming trusts not for asset protection purposes, but for tax avoidance purposes, as a consequence of the increase in the top tax rate. In 1999, when the top tax rate was increased, the promise was made that it would affect only 5% of taxpayers. Notwithstanding the fact that over the last decade there has been a significant slowing in the reported increase of higher incomes in a time of high economic growth, that 5% figure today has risen to 9%. In reality, because of the avoidance practice I've just spoken of, it's probably a lot higher in truth. And we're starting to see the evidence reported in the report of around 10,000 families as one example of higher income earners deliberately manipulating their taxable income to boost their eligibility for Working for Families tax credit. And we've also got the now well-rehearsed figure of a $200 billion investment in rental properties declaring $500 million in losses for the tax purpose. Mr Speaker, we cannot ignore those issues. And any reform of the New Zealand tax system has to start to address those distortions. And that's why tax rate alignment has always been a priority for United Future, and we welcome the fact that it's a medium-term commitment of this government. And I see the alignment of the top personal rate and the trust rate as an important start that we need to be focusing on to address the sorts of issues that I spoke of a moment or two ago. And Mr Speaker, we cannot have a system that is credible and fair if it gives rise to those distortions on an ongoing basis, because people simply will not believe it. Mr Speaker, I want to welcome the Prime Minister's announcement today that capital gains, land tax and a risk-free rate of return method for investment properties are all off the agenda. I've long opposed capital gains taxes as inefficient, as cumbersome, hard to put in place and based far more on envy considerations than sound tax policy. And I think it's time now to bury the capital gains issue once and for all as an option for New Zealand tax policy. But that's not to say that there are not big issues with regard to the taxation of investment property in particular that needs to be addressed, particularly in the light of the $500 million tax losses that I referred to a moment ago, and the fact that we've got around 10,000 families now claiming Working for Families tax credit as a consequence of deducting their rental losses against other taxable income. And we do need to be looking at the best way of plugging those holes. Now, I've seen this referred to in some media as being a concerted attack on landlords and property investors. It's not. It is simply about ensuring fairness and balance in the tax system and getting back to an important first principle, that investment decisions are driven by the quality of the particular investment, not the tax advantages to be derived from it. And in that regard, effective enforcement of the law as it stands is particularly important. And I want to acknowledge this fact. In Budget 2007, Dr Cullen and I secured additional funding for Inland Revenue to prosecute, in a non-legal sense, outstanding cases regarding properties. And to date, the return on that has been about 10 times the level of the funding advanced. So there is much more that we can do in that area, and I certainly think that will be a priority for action over the next little while. Mr Speaker, I want to say that the recommendations regarding an increase in the rate of GST are problematic. We all know the efficiency of a consumption tax. New Zealand's is in fact the best in the world, and one thing we've got to guard against is any argument that we start to exempt particular items from the GST net. We have a comprehensive GST in place now. But any move to increase that rate of GST can only proceed if a couple of essential preconditions are in place. There has to be an adequate compensation package for low and middle income households in particular. It is not going to work because of its regressivity if in fact those families and those households end up worse off as a result of any change. And any package that is introduced, and this is the second precondition, has to be of a sufficiently coherent and administratively simple manner that we're not building a comprehensive, cumbersome mountain of compensation to take the place of the GST increase. And the challenge that the government has over the next few weeks is working its way through that conundrum and then seeing where the balance lies. So I want to put on record my appreciation of the work of the Tax Working Group. When it was established, I wondered whether it would be possible to have a clear and coherent debate on tax issues because of their sensitive nature. New Zealanders and the Working Group have actually responded in a remarkably sensible and mature way to that opportunity. And I think that as the scale and the structure of international tax systems become more dynamic and our international tax competitiveness becomes more of an issue, the lesson of that working group is that we are going to need to be undertaking these types of reform processes on a far more regular basis than we do at present. If one thinks about it, sir, the changes that we are now contemplating in their scope, whatever their eventual outcome, will be the biggest single package of tax changes in this country in probably 2 decades. We did make some major changes to company tax a couple of years ago. We've made various changes along the way to personal taxes. But the lesson is simply this: we cannot afford to leave the gap between considering major change as long as it has been, because the world gets away on us, for one, and second, the range of issues become too difficult to deal with. So, Mr Speaker, we do need to have more regular reviews, and I'm certainly going to be looking at ways in which we can develop an ongoing tax working group type process to achieve that. Finally, sir, let me say this. It's all very well to talk about tax policy and how that might be implemented and who might benefit and who might not. For it to be effective, a good tax policy has to be supported by a good tax administration. And a compelling, complementary part of this change will be ensuring that Inland Revenue's ability to deliver the systems, the tax policy that we have in place now, the changes that will be made, is up to that standard, so that we have good policy supported by good administration. And that, sir, will lead us to this point: a tax system that is credible, a tax system that is respected, one that is fair and equitable and delivers the benefits that it is expected to the vast majority of New Zealanders. Mr Speaker, that will be a considerable achievement.
Speaker. I call the Honourable Chris Finlayson.